getting into it, the thing was an absolutely interesting video game at the time it came out. Like, we are talking about some of the most interesting action horror elements that I think I've ever seen in a game.
Nobody had ever seen anything like it before.
Kind of same question. What is it like to not only handle a game as unique as this, but also an IP just as massive and beloved as The Thing?
Just on that note, and Steve is really the driving force behind it, but we had been looking to get the rights to do that. We had been talking about doing this. It was on our list since the company started. You know, Steve as a youngster had a very strong personal attraction to the game. He started playing it during a very snowy New England winter. Very snowy New England winter doesn't usually require amplification, we know. So it must have been the absolute perfect time to be playing that game with the snow piling up outside. So, you know, that was something that it was IP that was very important to us, and we've been very careful to treat it with the reverence that it really deserves.
The original team behind The Thing talked about how, like, the fear and infection system were very experimental at the time, but because they had to have a story in there, these mechanics kind of clashed with the systems at the time, and it became very difficult to balance. And I was curious how the team has approached the challenge of that, and if they're retweaking things or if they're kind of keeping things the way they were.
I believe that the system is being mostly kept intact because, again, this is one of those instances where we went back and we read the reviews, and this was also something that some of the original developers talked to us about as well, like what their intentions were and how, you know, they didn't have exactly the time that they wanted to really kind of smooth out some of those things that were mentioned, such as the infection taking place on somebody that you literally just tested for infection, and it having to happen because of the scripted sequences in the game where one of your teammates was going to get infected no matter what. So it kind of took out a little bit of the player agency that they were kind of striving for initially in the original game. We're keeping a lot of that intact. It was part of the original game. There kind of isn't a way around it without redesigning major parts of the game itself. But what's interesting is they talked about what they were planning for a sequel, and the whole thing was going to take place around a dynamic infection system where basically if somebody got infected and you couldn't eliminate the thing in time, you would lose the game because it would spread to everybody at this, you know, this Antarctic camp that it took place in. But the problem was, and you know, they kind of found a lot of joy in talking about it, is that you could get a game over within the first couple of minutes of the game, because if an infection took place somewhere else in this open world and it just started, you know, taking over, there was nothing to do about it. So you know, there's a lot of tricky balancing in the original, but it sounds like even with this one that they were planning, as a result of that, it was going to get even harder. But yeah, it's something that we're aware of, and it's just going to be one of those things that is it's kind of like a legacy holdover.
And that kind of answers a little bit of my next question, which it sounds like you have had chances to talk with the original development team a little bit about this game, but also have you been in contact with Carpenter himself on any of this? Like, is he involved at all?
No, not John, but we have been working with a number of the original developers from Computer Artworks, who are the original devs on the game. Ron Ashtiani and Mark Atkinson. But they've basically been consulting with us and going through giving us some ideas on where to push things. Again, they may not have had the time back then to fully implement or design, but it's been invaluable for the team, much in the way that the original developers helped us out for games like Shadow Man and Quake 1 and Quake 2. It's been kind of an integral part of our secret recipe, you know, finding the people who made the game and hearing directly from them, like what they would have done differently back then if they had been able to. And then, you know, taking that advice and implementing it on our end and coming out with a better game on the other side.
You mentioned that Carpenter himself isn't directly involved, but he did have a cameo in the game, and there was the song that was at the end from Saliva, which, like, in this day and age of like licensed properties and IP, like, will these things be kept intact in the game? Like, will we still get to hear Carpenter as Faraday, and and Saliva at the end of the game?
Yeah, to my knowledge, those are both still in there.
Worth noting, like, you talked about it, like, with the sequel a little bit, but like some interesting aspects of the thing was that there were Game Boy versions in development. There was that sequel was in development, and eventually, like, most of these things got canceled at one point or another. And I thought back to like Star Wars Dark Forces Remastered, where like we got so much behind the scenes stuff, and alongside that was just so interesting to dig through. And I wonder, will we get to see some of that in the thing?
So we had the Vault. We introduced the Vault actually in Quake 2, and then again, as you mentioned, in Star Wars Dark Forces. We have not come to a final determination yet as to whether there will be a Vault in the thing or not, in the thing remastered. But we can tell you, and you can take this to the bank, that there will be plenty of content and surprises for fans to discover in the game.
What would you say is some of the challenges associated with taking on such a legendary IP as the thing?
So you want to make enough modifications. You want to make enough enhancements that people feel that they're getting a real value. That there have been done, that there have been things that are done that have made it more playable, more accessible to today's modern audiences. That's the sine qua non. I mean, that's the reason for all of the work that we do. At the same time, TJ, the challenge is there's a temptation to put your own mark on things, to change things, to improve them, and you want to be careful to preserve the elements that made the game great in the first place. It's one of the reasons why we focus so much on working with the original developers and asking the questions: what was your intent? If you had a better set of tools, what would you have done? What would you do differently? To stay within the realm of what made the game great, not lose any of those things, and at the same time to make sure that you give people enough value.
On the surface level, I can speak to this because it's, as a huge fan of the original movie, we've got some artists on our team that are probably even more fanatical than I am, and they have gone over every frame of the original movie, and they've picked up details and small little things, just visual things, that they've brought back into the game that were omitted for whatever reason in the original, to just make it look and feel more like Outpost 31 from the movie. So if you're a really big fan, there's going to be a lot there to appreciate.
That's awesome. It's almost like you just put out a Where's Waldo of, like, there's going to be Easter eggs, like what should I be looking for? Where's it going to be? What's that from?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Exactly.
And like, I have to ask at that point then, like, what has been the most exciting or perhaps surprising part of like getting the thing video game and kind of getting to see what's under the hood and how things worked and how it was set up in the original game versus what you're doing with it?
Yeah, I wish I could speak to the technical side of that, but from the perspective of our engineers, they always love to look at these games, the ones that have bespoke engines, the games that aren't powered by Unreal or even id Tech at this point, because everybody had unique ways of approaching those design challenges and those game mechanic challenges back in the day, that they would create their own systems. And so the guys really love to see literally how it was done under the hood. Like, in this game, how did they handle the aiming of the weapons? It's completely different than, say what is standard today, because everybody uses the same engine. And then from kind of like an art perspective, we're working with the original art director, and he's telling me, oh yeah, the guys got PTSD because they had to look at car crash photos for this reference of this guy being torn apart because they don't know what organ is like, he could be exposed here. You hear these stories and you see that your own team kind of going through the same movements, and you just gain a whole new appreciation for the people that came before us
years ago. And he's somebody that was instrumental in getting my career started. Matt Toshlag, who was one of the original developers of Descent, was talking about making games in the 1990s. They were building the engine that powered the game at the same time as they were making the game. Just incredible to think about.
We talked a little bit about the balance of like the systems, like the infection and fear system, but can you go over like the broad strokes of what are players going to see? What are the Nightdive touches that players going to see when they see the thing remastered?
I think that the biggest thing is going to be the graphical enhancements. One of the things that was expressed to us by the original development team is that they wanted the game to feel more like the movie in terms of specifically the lighting and the atmosphere. And while the original game did a really good job of it, the technical limitations of the time didn't really enable them to go as far as they wanted. And so that was kind of our big call to action from our art and programming teams, was to add more dynamic lighting, the ability to kind of color grade certain scenes like you can in film, and so a lot of the areas that you revisit in Outpost 31 will look very similar to those in the movie, in terms of, again, the lighting and the coloring of the scene. It sounds trivial, but it took a lot of technical work to be able to implement the tools to enable the team to do that kind of thing. It just really evokes the feeling of the movie now, much more so than it did originally, especially if you had played the game on PlayStation 2, when it came out. So that's like my biggest thing, is I hope that both new and old players who experience the game, they feel like they're there. They feel like they're at Outpost 31, and they can see the destruction and the mayhem that was left over from the original movie.
Yeah, we shipped 4 titles last year, including System Shock. This year we're really stepping up our game.
Stepping up, like y'all are already at it, hard work, like nonstop.
So this is another one where, just as a closing thing, I had mentioned during our Killing Time talk that like 5-6 years ago, that's when we wanted to do Killing Time. Well, the thing was very similar. I think, the day after System Shock 2 had been a success for me personally and had launched Nightdive, the thing was like the one that I wanted to do next. So it only took, almost 11 years, but it'll be worth the wait.
TJ, there's been a I guess a witticism that we've had at Nightdive for a while. It only took us 10 years to become overnight successes.